begin by releasing greenhouse gases into the Mars atmosphere. The effect would be to raise the planet's surface temperature to a livable level, melt polar ice caps to provide water, and plant trees to produce oxygen.
We know for a scientific fact that Earth will die. Everybody here on the planet Earth will cease to exist. And so we have to figure out how to get off this planet.
The search for extraterrestrial life extends from our own planetary neighborhood deep into the cosmos. But some scientists believe that to find alien life, we need to rethink our concept of time and look no farther than our own backyard. Unsealed case file, the Papua New Guinea wave. June 26th and 27th, 1959. Boyanai, Papua New Guinea. Reverend William Gill is a respected educator and ordained priest, teaching in Papua New Guinea. On the night of June 26th, he and 38 other witnesses see a light descend from the clouds and a large object that he later refers to as a mothership.
The mass sightings that took place in Papua New Guinea in 1959 were compelling and actually a little disturbing. The main witness was a missionary called Father Gill, and together with a number of locals, they saw UFOs over a period of several weeks, and there were probably 20, 30, 40, 50 sightings.
Reverend Gill describes the UFO as disc-shaped, with a wide base and landing gear.
On one of the occasions, Father Gill reported a craft where he said there was what appeared to be almost a viewing deck on top of this thing, where he saw strangely humanoid entities which almost appeared to be looking at us.
In a spontaneous gesture, Reverend Gill stretches his hand to wave, and he claims that the beings on the spaceship wave back.
He wasn't the only witness. There were about 5 other ones, including a teacher, that saw these humanoid beings on top of a UFO above them.
Copies of Reverend Gill's own report were distributed to members of Australia's parliament. But in the end, Air Force authorities dismissed the incident.
And you can almost understand an alien spaceship with aliens in. But if you see something with beings that are so similar to us that they're indistinguishable, it is almost the most disturbing thing of all. I mean, because you ask yourself, who are these people? What do they want? Why do they look so like us?
The sighting is so important that 13 years later, famous American UFO investigator Dr. Allen Hynek decides to re-examine the evidence.
Dr. J. Allen Hynek was a scientist who headed Project Blue Book. He started off as a pretty big skeptic, pretty much a debunker. He thought every UFO case that was out there was explainable. But as he saw more and more, and he talked to more witnesses, and he understood a little bit more about the phenomena, he was a skeptic debunker turned believer.
For him to say so many years after the event that this is important, and he flew out there and he interviewed some of the witnesses, this tells me that this was a case of almost unique interest and importance in the whole history of the UFO phenomenon.
Hynek is mostly interested in the eyewitness claims that the aliens looked human.
One possible reason why this disturbs people so much, and it's a motif that one sees in science fiction, is infiltration. I guess the classic sci-fi series is The Invaders, but the idea that we have aliens in human form, perhaps slowly bringing their people down, getting them into key positions of power.
Some speculate that the case in New Guinea is proof that the human race is being visited not necessarily by an alien race that comes from another solar system or another planet, but rather it's ourselves. It's the human race coming back in time to revisit its infant self, to look down at their civilization 1,000, 50,000, even 100,000 years prior to when they are.
Could the Papua New Guinea UFO incident be humans from the future?
I believe that if we are being visited and these UFOs are not our Earth-based technology, that it's probably an alien civilization that comes from the stars. But the fun thing about this is we simply don't know. Science is proven wrong all the time.
And how can you fight them if you don't know who they are? Your family, your friends, your neighbors, your scientific figures, your political leaders, your religious leaders. I mean, what if all these people are actually aliens? I mean, it sounds crazy. Any civilization with the technology to travel between the stars probably has the technology to disguise itself effectively. So maybe it's not a question of, going out and looking for them. Maybe they are already here.
While some search for extraterrestrials in deep space, encounters reported with humanoid beings have many in the UFO community wrestling with a paradox. Are extraterrestrials human beings from the future?
It's definitely possible that if a biological life form started evolving on another planet with Earth-like conditions on an Earth-like planet in a solar system that is like ours, that the theory of evolution will probably prove true, that they will look very similar to us.
Recently, an expert in computational genomics decided to find out.
Dr. Alan Kwan at Washington University conducted an intriguing study where he speculated about the future of the human race. And he said, well, we often look back, but what if we look forward, maybe 100,000 years? What might human beings look like?
Both a man and a woman, their head was growing in size, so it's much larger than what we look like today.
I mean, it's obviously human, and yet it isn't.
Many UFO researchers have seen these physical characteristics before.
If you go forward not 100,000 years, but 1 million, is that image going to actually be the image of a grey alien that would be familiar to every sci-fi fan and ufologist on the face of the planet? And that leads us to a possibility. Are the greys actually not aliens at all, but us? Are the greys what we, human beings, evolve into?
Could our genetic makeup be universally connected? Are alien visitors in our skies actually our distant relatives?
People often talk about the search for aliens. Well, maybe we've already found them. Maybe they're already here. Maybe if they are us, we are the aliens.
In the years right after World War II, UFO sightings are still considered rare and unusual events. But the UFO phenomenon is about to descend onto the world stage. Many government experts consider the unusual aircraft are not aliens from another world, but Soviet spies or Nazis testing Allied defenses and gathering intelligence for an impending war.
In the mid to late 40s, when you had these unknown craft that were appearing above the United States, there wasn't really necessarily an immediate fear that this was aliens attacking us. But we were just out of World War II. There was a lot of fear that this could be Nazi technology that survived the war, and they were doing some kind of second push.
Public attitudes about all of this were strange. We were in that odd post-war era. Everything was kind of in flux. The Nazis, the Japanese had been defeated, but this new enemy, our former ally, the Soviet Union, had emerged. The Second World War had transitioned into the Cold War. It was a time of great uncertainty, great confusion.
After Hiroshima, America's secret weapon is no longer a secret. But no one knows if the Soviet Union also has atomic weapons, or if escaped Nazis harbor the technology.
It was a period of unprecedented confusion, uncertainty, and nerves.
We knew that Nazis had escaped Germany. They could have very well have created some base somewhere else with this technology and started to attack us.
Unsealed case file. The Kenneth Arnold sighting. June 24th, 1947. Mount Rainier, Washington.
In June 1947, just before the infamous Roswell incident, a light aircraft pilot called Kenneth Arnold had a sighting which would change the world. While he was flying over the Cascade Mountains in Washington state, he saw 9 strange objects flying in formation at a speed he estimated to be 1,200 miles an hour.
Arnold claims the objects are delta-shaped craft and vary their angle and speed in a manner impossible for 1947. He describes the saucers moving at a speed that would kill a normal pilot, and initially concludes the objects are either remote-controlled and man-made or not of this world.
He was a pilot. He was aware of what was supposed to be in the sky and what was not.
This was significantly ahead of any technology that was flying at the time. And these strange delta-shaped craft were like nothing he'd ever seen before. And of course, he was a pilot, so a very good witness.
His story has been really known in the field of ufology as that first case, that first unknown interaction between an actual pilot seeing craft outside of his window that lacked any explanation whatsoever.
When he was asked later how these things had moved, not only did he describe the speed, but he went on to talk about a sort of jerky movement. And he said it was like a stone would be, like a saucer would be if you skipped it over the water. Before 1947, the public really didn't have anything to call UFOs. There was really no label for all of this.
But a newspaper catches on to Arnold's saucer description, and the term flying saucer enters the modern lexicon.
It tapped into something. It captured the public imagination. The story was syndicated around the world, and suddenly flying saucer fever swept the world. A new term had been born, and this really was the beginning of the flying saucer age.
In 1947, at the dawn of modern-day ufology, where flying saucers were being seen all around the United States, the government created the United States Air Force. Now, the United States Air Force pretty much took the lead in trying to figure out what UFOs were.
Just 1 week after the Air Force officially separates from the Army, it creates Project Sign, which becomes the first organization in the world to try and understand the UFO problem from a scientific perspective.
And Project Sign investigated numerous reports, brought in scientists to say, what are we dealing with here?
There wasn't 1 or 2 sightings at this point. They were being reported throughout the United States at a very high rate. So they knew the phenomena was real. They had to figure out what it was.
The fledgling U.S. Air Force initially considers many UFO sightings might be foreign enemy technology.
When these craft were appearing above America, we had no idea if the Soviets decided, well, hey, you know what? Maybe Hitler had a point to rule the world, and even though he failed and we got him, let's turn our sights to America and let's control those guys.
But as UFO sightings increase, so does the government's fear of what UFOs might actually be.
Just as the United States grabbed a whole bunch of Nazi scientists in Operation Paperclip and started putting together secret programs of their own, well, maybe the Soviets got some too. So could some of these flying saucers be Soviet aircraft or even missiles?
In 1947, UFO researchers from the United States Air Force struggled to explain a wave of sightings across the country, until a series of sightings at an important U.S. Air Force base has the government on high alert. Unsealed case file, the Muroc Air Force Base incident. July 7th, 1947, Southern California.
Shortly after Kenneth Arnold's flying saucer sighting, shortly after the Roswell incident, came a series of strange sightings at Muroc Air Force Base, now known as Edwards Air Force Base in California.
At 10 a.m. on July 7th, a pilot observes an unknown spherical object flying east at about 10,000 feet. On July 8th, 4 military personnel observed 2 circular objects flying at approximately 300 miles per hour, spiral toward the horizon.
Some of the craft were described as simply light spheres or orbs in the sky, while others were the more common flying saucer UFOs.
Later that evening, a P-51 pilot twice attempts to intercept a flat silver disc of a, quote, light-reflecting nature.
Pilot of a jet aircraft who actually chased a UFO unsuccessfully for a while. The speeds and maneuvers were described as too great for him to even catch this thing. Even the commanding officer had a sighting.
UFO sightings have suddenly become an alarming trend within the military community.
It's one thing for a civilian or even a civilian pilot to see flying saucers and describe them as such, but when the military themselves start seeing the same phenomena, they're seeing it over military installations, that's a problem.
When people who have huge experience in judging heights and speeds, when they say these are disc-shaped craft, when they talk about strange rotational motions, the military sits up and takes notice. These sightings were hugely significant.
Many inside the Air Force start to suspect that the unknown craft may be top-secret American technology.
The United States Air Force went through the assumption that they must be dealing with some sort of U.S. domestic military program that people investigating all of this just hadn't been briefed into.
But internal inquiries turn up nothing.
Now, eventually that theory was discarded because after a certain degree of investigation, all the branches of government were brought into this, and they said, no, we don't have anything like that.
Still without answers, Project Sign recruits a number of leading aeronautical experts. Among them, Alfred Loading.
One of the scientists that Project Sign brought aboard was Alfred Loading. His expertise would be instrumental to try and figure out what the UFO phenomena was.
Alfred Loading was an aeronautical engineer who had done pioneering work on disc-shaped and delta-shaped aircraft. Loading was seconded onto this because of his expertise and asked, what is it that we're dealing with here?
Loading and his colleagues are considered some of the greatest technological minds America has to offer.
These people were aeronautical engineers. These people were aviation specialists. These people were physicists. They, better than anyone on the face of the planet, had an idea of what the level of aviation technology was. So when they looked at the UFO reports, they said, look, the speeds, the maneuverability here, the rotation, the strange way in which these things move, we can't do that.
For the leading scientists of the day, it becomes a process of elimination.
This isn't German technology, back engineered. This isn't Soviet stuff. This isn't US domestic. This is above and beyond that. These scientists said, we simply don't have that technology. If it's not us, it must be somebody else. Increasingly and sensationally, parts of the US government started to think the unthinkable.
In the summer of 1947, a wave of UFO sightings forces the government to investigate what is being witnessed in the skies all across the country. Could it be technology created by hostile governments? Or something even more disturbing? Unsealed case file, the Childs Whited incident. July 24th, 1948, Montgomery, Alabama. Chief Pilot Clarence Childs and co-pilot John Whited are flying a DC-3 passenger plane on a routine night flight when Childs spots an object rapidly approaching in the sky.
Now, the pilot saw this craft. He knew it shouldn't be there, and it also did not look like anything that he could really easily recognize. He ends up tapping his co-pilot on the shoulder, telling him to take a look, and then they see this craft travel at an incredible rate of speed from a fairly far distance to nearly right in front of them.
The pilots described the craft as cigar-shaped, with glowing windows on the side.
This thing was closing fast. They almost literally braced for impact, took evasive action, and this object passed rapidly along the side of the aircraft. This is a classic case of trained aviation personnel, pilots, seeing these things and saying this was literally like nothing on Earth.
The near miss is taken seriously by the U.S. government.
I think the military knew that this was a very reliable case. They knew that the witnesses were very reliable themselves. The case truly showed how dangerous this phenomena could be. The pilots knew that they had to take evasive action to not collide with this unidentified craft.
When you're looking at highly trained pilots with nothing to gain and arguably everything to lose by coming out with this sort of thing, in terms of credibility, this is about as good as it gets.
I think the military knew as the commercial flights were going to increase in the coming years and decades, the problem had to be solved. It didn't matter if the UFO was alien or not. The fact that it was there, that a physical craft was there that could potentially cause that collision, bring down an airliner, that's a problem that needs to be fixed.
But according to aeronautics engineer and Project Sign investigator Alfred Loading, the problem is something the Air Force finds hard to accept.
It was Loading who was one of the first people to actually ask, could we be dealing here not with domestic US technology, not with Soviet technology, but with extraterrestrials? And he became one of the first people to really consider what was in later years dubbed the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
The cases that they were investigating, the UFOs, the craft, were performing maneuvers that we essentially couldn't do at the time. And so they really had no other explanation for it.
This near miss put in people's minds for the first time the idea that we're dealing here with not just lights or shapes in the sky, but structured craft with occupants.
These craft are now showing that they can go anywhere and everywhere that they want, that there's absolutely no limitation to it.
To this day, the Childs Whited case remains unidentified.
Later, when people involved in Project Blue Book, like Captain Ruppelt, looked back and said, what are the most compelling cases that we have on our files? This near miss is pretty much at the top of the pile.
The Childs Whited incident leads some experts to consider an unimaginable possibility.
If it isn't us, could it be that some of this is extraterrestrial in technology? Are we being visited?
After a wave of sightings in the 1940s, the U.S. government's UFO investigative body, Project Sign, is tasked with finding an explanation.
And Project Sign investigated numerous reports, brought in scientists to say, what are we dealing with here? And finally, they produced an assessment, an intelligence assessment, known as Estimate of the Situation.
Now, this was a document that essentially outlined their conclusions. It put forward the explanation that the UFO phenomena truly was connected to aliens and extraterrestrials.
To this day, the report has allegedly been seen by only a select few.
Nobody can find it. It mysteriously just simply vanished. Freedom of Information Act requests have been filed all over the place, and the document just doesn't exist.
It was suppressed, it was hidden, maybe it was shredded. This was dynamite.
It marks the beginning of a decades-long denial of the UFO phenomenon.
This was essentially the dawn of the military denial phase. It was like one arm would say, hey, this is true. The other arm would say, no, it's not true.
It really was a tug of war between believers and skeptics, not in the public, but within government, within the small ranks of those people charged with investigating this phenomenon.
So this document, I think, is probably, if it exists, the most important piece of evidence that would come out of this era.
This was nothing short of those people within the US government charged with investigating UFOs saying, we have investigated and we are being visited. It would be like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying, you know what, all this talk about UFOs, it's real. We're being visited. We're not alone. Can you imagine the public reaction?
Communities around the world rely on policemen and women to ensure safety and security. And if an extraterrestrial threat were to suddenly occur, they would almost certainly be the first to respond.
Police officers are very important witnesses. They're highly trained to be visual, observe, and essentially document their daily routine.
But what happens when they witness a close encounter of the third kind? Unsealed case file, the Zamora incident. April 24th, 1964, Socorro, New Mexico. New Mexico State Police Officer Lonnie Zamora is in hot pursuit of a speeding car when something catches his attention.
He saw a strange light in the sky and heard a roaring sound, rather like a rocket.
Zamora breaks off his pursuit of the speeding car and is concerned that the roaring sound is a local dynamite shack exploding. But then he sees an object above him.
He broke off his pursuit and decided to follow this strange object. He lost sight of it for a while, and then when he came over a hill, he encountered this most extraordinary scene of what looked like a spherical or oval-shaped silver object actually on the ground.
He stops his patrol car, gets out of his car, and actually starts to approach the object. He sees it and describes it as this white in color, spherical or saucer-shaped craft. It had definitely landed on the ground. And then he sees bodies actually exit the craft, walk out into the field. As he approaches whomever these beings were, he describes it as like he startled them or kind of scared them a little bit, and that they got back into the craft and took off.
The craft accelerates out of sight at an incredible speed.
As the craft was taking off, he remembered that there was some type of flame or maybe an engine of some kind that was underneath the craft as it took off. And as he approached where the object was, he saw that there was actually trace evidence or evidence that was left behind that something was there.
Zamora's training takes over. He gets on the radio and calls in.
This really was almost a perfect storm of what makes a UFO case compelling. A police witness, a landed UFO, and physical traces.
His testimony about the flame underneath the craft was backed up by the evidence that was left in the field. So we had scorched ground, scorched vegetation, that something was definitely there, and something altered the vegetation in the field.
The Zamora sighting quickly becomes one of the most heavily investigated UFO sightings of its day. The Army, Air Force's Project Blue Book, NICAP, and the FBI all try to understand its implications.
There was an area of the desert which seemed to be kind of more glassy, as if there really had been something with a high heat source present there. And when the US government looked at this, they said, we really don't know what to make of this.
Noted Project Blue Book astronomer Alan Hynek arrives on the scene. Hynek has years of experience investigating not only aerial phenomena, but the people who witnessed them.
Hynek called Officer Zamora an unimpeachable witness, and I think that there's a couple of reasons for that. He was a very honest and trustworthy police officer, but on top of that, you also had physical trace evidence that you can touch, feel, and back up his testimony.
Critics find it hard to dismiss Zamora's testimony.
When he didn't know something, he said, I don't know. When he didn't see something, he said, I didn't see it. This was a man who did not guess. And Hynek said, witnesses don't get any better than this.
There are also other eyewitnesses who describe seeing and hearing the same object in the same area at the same time.
People higher up the chain of command would look at a case like this and still dismiss UFOs as just misidentifications and hoaxes. Famously, Hynek went on to say, the Air Force doesn't know what science is.
But the Air Force's formal public report rejects some elements of the testimony and attempts to discredit the other eyewitnesses, even Zamora himself.
There were some theories that were put around about Zamora. They were pretty insulting, actually. Maybe he had been the victim of a practical joke. Maybe he'd been in on some hoax to try to bring tourism to the area. None of these theories stood up. He had nothing to gain by this, and probably everything to lose.
But a secret report prepared for the CIA states there is no question about Zamora's reliability.
In later years, Zamora became so disillusioned with both the Air Force and indeed with the UFO community that he really dropped out of the whole scene. He just wanted an explanation, and he never got one.
Most UFO sightings are plagued by contradictions and inconsistencies. But police UFO sightings are comprehensive, critical, and scientific. In a word, they are credible. But what happens when over 24 police officers witness something unexplainable in the sky? Unsealed case file. The Cosford Incident. March 30th and 31st, 1993. Devon, England.
The Cosford Incident from the UK in March 1993 is one of the best evidenced waves of UFO sightings in recent years. There were several dozen UFO sightings, many of which were from serving police officers and military personnel.
The high point of the Cosford wave saw 2 Air Force bases directly overflown by an unknown craft. And the UK Ministry of Defence's very own UFO investigator, Nick Pope, was on the case.
The UFO was seen by a patrol of military police officers, and they said that this thing passed directly overhead and was triangular in shape and of immense size. But at the second base, Shawbury, the meteorological officer reported to me the following morning that he had seen a huge triangular-shaped craft flying maybe no more than 200 feet above the ground.
But what the officer sees next shakes him to the core.
He saw a thin beam of light fire down from this UFO to the ground and then track backwards and forwards as if it was looking for something. And then, he said, from a very slow speed, maybe no more than 50 miles an hour, the beam of light retracted and the UFO from this slow speed accelerated away to the horizon just in an instant. His voice, by the way, was still shaking as I interviewed him the following morning.
Nick Pope digs deeper into the case, and his reports reach the leaders of the Ministry of Defense.
We were all completely baffled. There was nothing tracked on radar. There were 1 or 2 possibly vague pings, but nothing that we could say with any certainty were any kind of aircraft that we were familiar with.
Police officers were instrumental in convincing authorities that something violated UK airspace.
Police officers played a huge part in bringing the Cosford incident to light. It was a report from a patrol of Air Force police officers at RAF Cosford that really was one of the key incidents of that whole night. Police officers in the surrounding area were able to say that civilians had seen this thing too. So it was the police that drew together the strands of this.
One of the key factors in gathering evidence was the UK's implementation of a standardized police form.
Every single police station in the United Kingdom had a standard operating procedure and indeed a form whereby we in the Ministry of Defence had given them the questions that we wanted answered. So this came to us in a strictly regimented format so that we had all the raw data that we needed in terms of date, time, location, height, speed, description, sound, etc.
The quality of the police testimony played a critical role.
I interviewed many of the police, civilian and military. Their testimony was second to none. These people were trained observers. And when they relayed this to me, I was able to say with a high degree of confidence, this is exactly the way that this happened.
After such an in-depth investigation, the UK government comes to a stunning conclusion.
For the first time that I can recall, we put in black and white in our assessment that an uncorrelated target, an unidentified craft, penetrated the UK's sophisticated air defence network and flew with apparent impunity for hours over the United Kingdom. So it's arguably the only government assessment of UFOs that directly contradicts the party line, the official line.
Civilian extraterrestrial sightings are often greeted with skepticism. However, eyewitness reports filed by police personnel can elevate UFO case files.
If they see something strange and unusual, chances are you're going to get a very detailed response from them.
But in some cases, highly coordinated efforts by multiple police officers can yield more questions than answers. Unsealed case file, the St. Clair Triangle. January 5th, 2000, Southern Illinois. Officer Ed Barton responds to a 4 a.m. call from dispatch. Witnesses claim they have seen a UFO in the night sky. When Officer Barton arrives at the location, he witnesses a black triangle beaming powerful lights to the ground. He claims the triangle emits no noise and does not behave like conventional aircraft. Suddenly, the triangle accelerates out of sight, and it is picked up by another police officer in the next town.
Here you've got many of these police witnesses describing a vast triangular-shaped craft just hanging there in the sky and then suddenly accelerating away to the horizon at high Mach speeds. What really made this compelling was that not only were some of the witnesses police officers out on patrol, but these police officers were radioing back to their dispatchers what they were seeing, and they were also coordinating the investigation when it came to sightings from the public.
And they were able to actually document where this craft was heading and then have other police officers essentially pick up the chase and follow this craft wherever it was going.
5 police departments spanning a large area of southwest Illinois tracked the triangular UFO.
And it was that type of communication which ultimately became a very powerful tool for them to essentially track this UFO to try and figure out what it was. When you have multiple police officers that are able to essentially track a UFO and they can stay in contact with each other through radio contact, that brings another level of credibility to this.
I can't say with any certainty that this was extraterrestrial. We have no definitive proof, but sometimes with a sighting like this, you're really left with the feeling there's not much else it can be.
But some experts believe the Illinois Triangle can be explained.
But I think at the end of the day, it's that probably a military aircraft. Because when you look at our technology, when you look at the F-117 stealth fighter, and you look at what we have flying in the skies, or what ultimately could be a top-secret aircraft, it is very similar in design. So I think the Black Triangle UFO phenomena, what we're seeing is maybe a peek into technology that's being developed, but the military hasn't told us yet.
Whatever it was, some experts believe that even the most credible testimony will always be met with a certain degree of skepticism.
I think there's another factor at play here, and this is human variation. Different witnesses have different memories, they have different belief systems, different perceptions. I think almost everyone is going to see and perceive something, particularly something exotic, outside their normal frame of reference in a different way. The irony is that this is something every police officer will tell you.
Police accounts of UFO sightings can elevate the study of unknown objects in our skies.
I think a police officer, when they see something like that, that level of credibility is really raised for a particular case, because you do have that level of honesty and reliability and essentially training that if they saw something that they cannot explain. I think that's something that we have to look at.
However, even the most highly trained police personnel are not immune to skeptics, something the officers involved in the St. Clair Triangle incident know all too well.
In the aftermath of the Illinois UFO sightings, many of the police witnesses, many of the police officers who investigated this and saw things themselves, they had headaches, they had anxiety, depression, they became the butt end of jokes.
If you start getting made fun of or somebody completely discounts what you saw, the next time you see something like that, my guess is you're going to be pretty apprehensive to coming out and explaining what you saw.
So I think you're looking at the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole bunch of other police sightings out there that never see the light of day at all because the people think, well, what's in it for me? Only a whole bunch of heartache.
Along with ridicule comes a culture of suppression.
And I think we see this time and time again. We see this with military, commercial aviation pilots. We see them come out with a story, and what happens? They get made fun of. There's always a joke at the end of a news broadcast.
Higher up the chain of command, you clearly have, as you have, for example, also with pilots, people saying, we really don't want you talking to the media about this.
But at the end of the day, the most credible witnesses just may be the people we trust to keep us safe.
I think that UFO investigators recognize that if you have two cases, one of which has a police officer backing up and one doesn't, chances are the case with the police officer is going to rank just a little bit higher than all the others.
In 1981, NASA launches its first space shuttle, Columbia, marking a new era in space exploration.
It really kind of gave us a floating laboratory in the sky versus the older Apollo rockets that you would just strap in and essentially hope for the best. The space shuttle was a much more controlled environment for human spaceflight.
They were used to launch and to repair satellites. They were used for cutting-edge scientific research. And of course, they played a hugely pivotal role in the construction of the International Space Station.
For the first time, mankind establishes a permanent presence in space. It has been continuously occupied since the year 2000.
The space shuttle was instrumental in creating our next steps in human spaceflight, getting beyond the moon and essentially towards Mars and beyond.
2 years before the first mission to build the International Space Station, a NASA shuttle captures stunning video of what many consider to be a UFO. Unsealed case file, the Tether Incident. February 22nd, 1996, Kennedy Space Center, Florida. Space Shuttle Columbia is launched on its 19th mission. The goal is to deploy an experimental satellite system into orbit on a conducting tether.
The tether incident from the Space Shuttle mission STS-75 is one of the biggest conspiracy theories involving NASA.
The Space Shuttle's mission was to launch a more than 12-mile-long space tether out from the shuttle cargo bay. Now, this thing stretched for 12 miles, but it actually ended up breaking before it could extend to about a 12.8-mile length.
Strange objects were seen, and some believe that these objects were UFOs, perhaps monitoring what NASA was doing with this satellite and this tether.
This is actual live footage recorded by NASA of the STS-75 tether incident.
As the astronauts continued to film the tether, you saw these mysterious objects that seemed to be flying behind this focal point on the film. Now, we know for a fact that this was 12 miles long, and yet it appeared that these craft were passing behind it. Now, math can deduce that these objects were huge, and nobody could explain them.
But NASA is quick to dismiss the incident as space debris.
There's a huge amount of debris out there in space. The space tracking radars that are located at various locations on Earth track literally thousands of these pieces, some of them just inches across, but others defunct satellites, for example.
Scientists have estimated that there are more than 20,000 objects bigger than a softball that are in orbit around Earth. They're going more than 17.5 thousand miles an hour. So you're talking about bullets going everywhere around trying to fly an airplane. That creates quite a challenge for safe human spaceflight.
I don't think people realize just how much is out there. Spanners and gloves dropped by astronauts on previous missions, bits of foam, all sorts of debris. If any of this directly impacts a satellite, it could take it out. If any of it directly impacts an astronaut, it could be fatal.
But some experts are not convinced that the objects seen in the STS-75 footage are space debris.
When you look at the evidence, the real evidence, you look at the videos, you see that a lot of times these objects appear to be intelligently controlled, that they're making right-angle turns. They're not just slowly floating off into space and then they go away. I mean, these are things that appear time and time again.
One theory is that the shuttle released large pieces of debris from its cargo bay minutes before the UFOs appeared on screen. But critics claim the space shuttle rarely sheds any debris from its cargo bay.
Once the STS-75 footage and the tether incident really came to light, people were very excited over this because I think that this was, to many, undeniable proof that there was something massive flying in space that wasn't us.
NASA effectively live streamed a lot of its missions, and so this footage was all being recorded and was getting out there, and there are a whole bunch of, I guess you would call them, space geeks who would tap into this, record it off the NASA feed, and then go back and try and analyze and interpret it, literally frame by frame.
You see these gigantic objects that appear to pass behind the tether. Doing that math, some scientists, some experts, they postulate that these objects were miles in diameter. And that's not anything that we've put up there.
Many in the UFO community believe NASA's live feed may have captured compelling footage of UFOs in Earth's orbit. But are the objects extraterrestrial spaceships or a trick of the camera?
Many years ago, NASA decided to start broadcasting their camera feeds from space.
It's very difficult for people that really don't know anything about space photography and the way in which things look in space to really get a true handle on what's going on. The ordinary person can't judge distances, they can't judge the sizes of objects.
Those amateur researchers then would go in and start analyzing frame by frame by frame, and they made some fascinating discoveries that it wasn't just space, stars, and a few debris things hanging around outside, that it appeared to have evidence of craft being seen outside the space station or the space shuttle.
Compelling footage of what may be extraterrestrial craft has been recorded from multiple cameras mounted on the International Space Station and on the now decommissioned space shuttles.
There are fixed cameras mounted on some of the space shuttles and the rockets, for example. The astronauts, of course, themselves have handheld cameras, so they can point and shoot at specific things as situations arise.
And in many cases, astronauts are following orders from mission control.
Indeed, if you look at mission control itself, there are fixed cameras in the room recording all the time what's going on at mission control. So there's multiple levels of this. The central philosophy running through all of this is don't miss anything.
Unsealed case file, The Abrupt Turn. September 15th, 1991. Kennedy Space Center, Florida. Space Shuttle Discovery launches into orbit to deploy several satellites. It completes 81 orbits of Earth and travels over 2 million miles, surveying vast swaths of space. During the mission, one of its cameras catches an unusual sight.
As the astronauts were filming outside the window, they see multiple objects.
There are bright objects just drifting in straight lines.
Hundreds of objects that are floating all around outside of their spacecraft.
And then something even more strange occurs.
All of a sudden in the film, you see this bright flash of light that appears to have come from the surface of Earth. And a split second later, you see one of the objects. And then you see that object make a right-angle turn. And again, that what may be a weapon of some kind just shoots right by the UFO.
Some experts believe the objects change direction as if under intelligent control.
Not so, point out the skeptics. If one piece of debris hits another, as will happen from time to time just through the laws of chance, then of course there will be this change of direction.
Others are not convinced.
And so NASA tried to say, well, the flash of light you see is the shuttle thruster. And when they file the thruster, that's when you see the object make a move.
But on close inspection, some of the objects in the film are moving in multiple directions.
And so when you would fire a thruster like that, common sense tells you everything will essentially go the same way. And that's not the case with the STS-48 footage. At the end of the day, I think we may have more questions than answers.
The UFO community follows NASA's space shuttle program night and day. And over the course of 135 missions, space shuttle cameras have captured unidentified objects, turning many amateur enthusiasts into investigators.
I don't think they quite expected for amateurs to start tapping into those feeds and literally recording 24 hours a day whatever those shuttle cameras were seeing.
Unsealed case file, The Smoking Gun. November 19th, 1996, Earth's orbit. Space Shuttle Columbia is on what will become the longest shuttle mission in history, 17 days.
The STS-80 mission is something that's also excited a lot of people in the UFO community, and they refer to this sometimes as the smoking gun incident.
190 nautical miles above the Earth, Space Shuttle Columbia's cameras point toward the Earth's upper atmosphere.
During STS-80, the astronauts were filming outside of the window at a massive hurricane that had formed here on Earth. And in the process of filming this hurricane, they saw an unknown object appear seemingly out of the clouds and start moving towards the lightning in this massive storm.
And there are a series of flashes, and then there seem to be these strange objects just drifting across the field of vision.
Surrounded by what some say appears to be a plasma field, the unidentified object decelerates, hovers, and then turns and continues down across the Earth.
Now, the question is, what exactly is this object? Because you can then see what lightning looks like because it's going on at the same time. So you can rule that out.
These points of light, I mean, that some UFO believers seize upon and say are alien spacecraft, I mean, to me, this is just part of the huge amount of dust and debris that's out there.
Whatever this object was circular in nature, and it seems like it was almost attracted to what was going on inside the storm. And it's something that really lacks any explanation whatsoever.
But some experts think they may have the answer.
None of these things seem to really behave in a way that would indicate that they were under intelligent control. I mean, pretty much all these things just drift in a straight line at a constant speed.
NASA experts quickly dismiss any UFO speculation, suggesting that the thrust of Columbia's RCS jets pushed ice crystals into its wake.
NASA, in their typical fashion, wanted to explain away the STS-80 footage as simply being ice crystals.
NASA often says that many of these so-called anomalous images that show up on so many of these films are ice crystals. And this has become almost a standing joke in the UFO community that, oh, well, you know, NASA dismissing these UFOs that we see right in front of us here. Oh, more ice crystals.
But some see much more than ice crystals.
When you look at it, it looks undeniably like some type of craft or something that is much farther in the distance than an ice crystal could ever be seen at. NASA and the government, the military, they come out with these explanations that are so off the wall ridiculous. You can't help but think, why don't they just not address it at all? Because that would be less conspiratorial than them trying to go over the top and say, oh yes, that massive, what seems to be 12-mile in diameter spaceship is simply an ice crystal. Nothing makes sense whatsoever.
On board the Space Shuttle Columbia at the time is payload specialist and veteran astronaut Story Musgrave. Musgrave witnesses the object, stating, quote, "I don't know what it is. It appears to come from nowhere. It's really impressive."
A lot of people in the UFO community have seized on this and said, ah, well, he must know something.
Musgrave has also gone on record as saying that he does not believe that we are alone in the universe.
But I don't think he has any evidence that we're being visited. It would be kind of crazy to assume that we're alone in the universe, and that is just his belief system. If NASA really was the gatekeeper here, the guardian of this great secret about UFOs, there's no way that they'd be putting this footage out for the public to see in the first place.
Many in the UFO community believe that cameras documenting NASA's space missions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week have captured UFO activity.
There have been some cases where NASA's live feed has been cut, and I think believers and conspiracy theorists say, wait a minute, that something must have happened, and NASA didn't want the world to see.
But despite consistent denials, one such incident in January 2015 leaves more questions than answers.
In January of 2015, NASA was streaming their live feed from the International Space Station when a mysterious object appeared in the background of the shot. Now, a split moment later, all of a sudden the feed cuts. Everything goes offline. After about 5 minutes, the feed comes back, and you see in the video that this object, whatever it is now gone.
NASA also employs a standard broadcast delay on its live feed.
If something catastrophic were to happen, arguably if we look back at the space shuttle disasters, the families don't necessarily want to see that live. I think another point is there's no secret in the fact that there are classified military satellites, for example, and maybe again sometimes these broadcast delays are just to ensure that one of these secret projects isn't inadvertently exposed to the world.
But how can NASA publicly appear transparent and still maintain the highest level of secrecy?
It's safe to assume that after all these cases and sightings, all these videos that are being live fed to the world, where anybody can sit and watch them in real time as they occur, is problematic. And so they're probably broadcasting these live feeds, what they claim live feeds, but probably with a massive delay. And then that will kind of bring down the amount of evidence that investigators are collecting. Because, let's face it, the evidence is absolutely mounting up that something is going on.
We all want to know for sure, do aliens exist? And have they visited Earth? Many experts believe that only one type of UFO encounter can promise hard evidence of the existence of aliens: a mass sighting.
A mass UFO sighting is an event that occurs where not one, not two, but multiple eyewitnesses will see the event. This is very important because when you only have one witness that has a story, or maybe even two, they can easily be mistaken. What you want is a mass sighting in a city where they don't have the intent of finding a UFO. And those do occur. They're rare, but they absolutely do occur.
Unsealed case file, the Madagascar incident. August 16th, 1954, Antananarivo, Madagascar. Dozens of Air France personnel have just received a large mail delivery and are quietly chatting near one of the busiest streets in Madagascar's capital. Suddenly, someone points to the sky and everyone on the street is stunned by what they see.
Thousands of people witnessed a strange object. It appeared at first as a green plasma heading for the ground, and people thought perhaps it was some sort of fireball or meteor. In all, it's almost impossible to assess how many people saw this thing, but it was certainly hundreds, if not thousands, possibly tens of thousands.
They expected after it dipped behind a hill that it was actually going to crash, and they expected a big explosion. But there was no explosion. A few moments later, they saw the craft again, and it seemed like it had increased a bit in size visually from their vantage point. And they see that there is not only that one UFO, but then a second metallic-shaped UFO object that seemed to be trailing it.
Witnesses also describe a flame shooting out from behind the second UFO.
Was it alien? Was it a top-secret program? We simply don't know. But the reality of having well over 1,000 witnesses to this, of highly educated, trained personnel, and when they look at something and they go, this is not like anything we've ever seen before, that's something that they knew was not explainable.
Witnesses included Air France technical personnel, including Monsieur Campagnac, who was a former military officer and one of the key witnesses.
Campagnac describes a lens-shaped, green plasma-like object, the size of a DC-4 aircraft, and it's being followed by a smaller, silent, metallic UFO.
These two objects passed directly over the town, witnessed by hundreds, maybe thousands of people, and he, as a former military officer and highly competent scientist for Air France, was clearly an extremely reliable witness.
Years later, the French government performs a comprehensive study of UFOs, and the Madagascar incident is seen as a key piece of evidence.
Monsieur Campagnac told his story to Cometa, and it was one of the reasons, perhaps, why sensationally Cometa concluded that some UFOs may well be extraterrestrial in origin.
When you see an unexplained craft in the sky, of course it could potentially be man-made. There's always that possibility. But this was 1954. We are now well into the 21st century. If this was technology that was our own, if this was manufactured by humans here on Earth, my guess is we'd see something like this already.
Technology aside, can mass sightings lead to mass hysteria?
In the 1950s with the Robertson panel, it was concluded that these UFO cases could absolutely be the cause for this mass hysteria. That it wasn't the aliens themselves, if they were here, being that threat. It was the people themselves, the humans here on Earth, that were the threat. Because then all of a sudden you realize you're just simply not in control anymore. Everything that you've been led to believe is gone.
The thinking was that if people were literally panicking in the streets over UFOs, the Soviets might plant false UFO stories as a prelude to attack or invasion. This was one reason why the US government came to think maybe these sightings aren't real.
But local eyewitnesses in Madagascar were not hysterical, because as they claimed, they had seen these UFOs before.
What they saw was very genuine. They saw what they did. They described what they saw. They had no kind of prior exposure to these types of topics before. And that in itself makes that witness testimony much more valuable.
These were uncontaminated witnesses whose testimony is extremely important.
And there's another group of witnesses whose testimony is not affected by traditional media.
Dogs were barking. Barnyard animals were going crazy. Something was clearly upsetting them. And what was particularly intriguing about this was that the sphere that was completely silent seemed to provoke the most reaction. This is something which takes a UFO sighting from the realms of speculation into, well, clearly something happened for all those people to have seen it.
Mass sightings of unidentified flying objects are rare, But when they do happen, investigators are flooded with evidence.
When you have, let's say, 50 witnesses or 100 witnesses, the chances of them all being mistaken on what they saw is pretty nil. And so I think when it comes to evidence, a mass sighting is really what you want to see more than anything else.
But what happens when a mass sighting becomes a matter of national security? Unsealed case file, the Hudson Valley sightings. December 31st, 1981, Hudson Valley, New York.
The Hudson Valley UFO sightings are probably one of the most significant mass UFO events in history. There were, over a series of years, but peaking in 1983, certainly so far as media interest was concerned, a total of around about 5,000 individual sightings. And this was entire communities caught up in this whole affair.
One of the first reports came from a retired policeman.
It all began by a retired police officer going into his backyard, sitting on his porch, and he frequently watches the commercial airliners fly overhead. Now, expecting that's what he would see, he then saw this mysterious triangle-shaped craft with different colored lights on it that he simply could not explain.
Local police are flooded with calls.
Police said that their normal business was impeded. They just couldn't respond to the day-to-day reports of crimes because so many members of the public were calling in saying, we're seeing UFOs.
The Hudson Valley UFOs are estimated to have been seen by over 7,000 people, generating an overwhelming variety of descriptions.
Now, what people were seeing predominantly were individual lights in the sky, but these lights were in formation, and it appeared that they were on the underside of massive V-shaped craft. And some people have described these in terms of, I've heard phrases used like flying Walmart or flying football fields. These things were on an almost unprecedented scale.
Then, on July 24th, 1984, the UFO is witnessed over a highly sensitive power plant.
The most disturbing aspect to the whole Hudson Valley UFO wave was the sighting over the Indian Point nuclear power plant. Now, at one point, a UFO was seen directly over the installation, and really a matter of feet away from the reactor. And at that point, of course, there is, as there always is, a total air exclusion zone around this.
The Indian Point nuclear reactors are operated by the federal government and are rumored to provide power for a number of secret government bases in Connecticut and New York.
When you talk about a sensitive installation like a nuclear reactor, to have an unidentified aircraft above that installation is a big problem. But if this is 1,000 foot long and they have absolutely no idea what it is, that's a really big problem.
If an aircraft, for example, were to crash into this, you could have a nuclear disaster on the scale of Chernobyl. For that reason, the power plant supervisor at one stage contemplated contacting the authorities and ordering an airstrike on this mystery object.
As the tense moments play out, witnesses are worried not just about what is in the sky, but why it is there.
Did the UFO have this nuclear installation under surveillance? Was it some sort of reconnaissance? Or was there hostile intent here? Nobody knew.
It's not surprising that they would want to create some kind of offensive maneuver to get this thing away. Call in an airstrike, scramble in some jets, whatever they have to do, but they needed to get that craft out of there.
After hovering over the reactor for 15 minutes, the UFO suddenly vanishes.
Clearly, this shows that there are huge issues raised by this phenomenon, and it's something which clearly governments can and do take with the utmost severity and importance. Something here is going on, and we need to know what it is.
The Hudson Valley mass sightings catch the attention of Project Blue Book's former chief scientific advisor, Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
Hynek could find no conventional explanation for these Hudson Valley UFO sightings. He could conclude what this wasn't. But I mean, this is the ultimate irony of UFOs. You can say what it isn't, but he wasn't able to say with any degree of confidence what it was.
That we are still lacking that evidence, that smoking gun, to definitively say that there was an alien spacecraft over that nuclear reactor. Was it possible? Absolutely.
To this day, these sightings remain a complete mystery, and if someone like Hynek, who investigated UFOs for the government, can't come up with an explanation, who can?
Aviation experts and UFO investigators are often stumped by mass sightings, leading many mass incidents to be judged inconclusive. Some say incomplete data is to blame, while others think something else is at play.
When you talk about a society who sees a certain type of alien or gets described an alien encounter over and over, you're kind of bred to believe certain things about alien encounters. And if that one person believes that's what they see, then the next person will back that up, and the next person will back that up.
Unsealed case file, The French Wave. November 5th, 1990, France. In one of the world's largest mass sightings ever, over 1,000 people in one night report a series of UFO sightings. The reports are tracked from the southwest of France, traveling diagonally to the northeast.
On November 5th, 1990, about 1,000 witnesses in France witnessed multiple flashing objects in the sky. They were not commercial aircraft. They could easily dismiss all of that. So whatever these UFOs were, they believed that they were from another world.
Some people described fast-moving lights, but others described a more structured craft. I mean, again, one sees with this case the idea that there are perhaps larger structures, motherships, out of which come smaller scout craft.
Some witnesses even described that they were making maneuvers, like making turns or actually increasing elevation.
But the most credible accounts of the mass sighting come from pilots.
A particularly significant aspect of these French sightings were the fact that some of the witnesses were pilots. These UFOs were seen and reported by a number of commercial airline pilots.
British Airways pilot Captain Mike Dalton and his crew are flying near France, above Genoa, Italy, when they witness a triangular formation of lights maneuvering at speeds that defy known laws of physics. Dalton later states, quote, "It had to be something from another planet, because it was definitely not man-made."
These people are excellent witnesses and the least likely of anyone to misidentify all the sorts of usual things that perhaps people mistakenly report as UFOs.
European ground radar is unable to confirm Dalton's sighting, but the following night, NASA gives an explanation. Debris from a Russian Proton rocket had burned up upon re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
Now, they could be very plausible, but rocket fragments don't increase elevation, they decrease elevation.
I've spoken to astronomers about this sort of thing, and they tell me that this would be a high-altitude firework display, visible for no more than a few seconds.
But experienced pilot Captain Mike Dalton remains convinced, telling the media, quote, "In all my 23 years of flying, I've never seen a craft, anything like this."
That's potentially an aircraft of some kind, a spacecraft of some kind. So over 1,000 people witnessed. Could they all be wrong? Probably not.
A large group of people witnessing the same UFO is rare. But many in the UFO community believe mass sightings are on the rise.
The frequency of UFO sightings themselves are definitely increasing. If you look at the last 10, 15, and 20 years, you do see a very big increase in the rash of sightings around the world.
Are we building up to something? I don't know, but every time there's an acceleration of pace in this phenomenon, that's certainly one possible conclusion.
But for some experts, a mass sighting alone is not enough to provide the world with sufficient proof of an alien existence.
I think that history shows us that a mass sighting in itself, all over 1,000 witnesses, videos from multiple angles, photographs, and so on, will not convince the masses.
One scenario that I suppose would certainly resolve this for once and for all is a mass sighting, for example, over the Super Bowl or over the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. Now, something like that would take the whole UFO phenomenon from the realms of speculation across the line into absolute hard fact.
I think really to make that final determination for society, as the human race, a world society, to say that aliens are real, you do need contact of some kind. When it comes down to it, they're going to need that alien to land on the White House lawn, come out and slap the president across the face and say, tell your people we're here. And I think that that's ultimately is what's going to happen.
We are close to proving that life once existed on Mars, but it hasn't always been this way.
Mars has been the subject of human fascination for thousands of years. Our distant ancestors looked up into the skies, and it was one of the most noticeable objects. And of course, one of the things that made it so interesting was the blood red color. I mean, this association with blood, of course, led to Mars, the god of war.
After landing on the moon in 1969, many in the space community saw Mars as the next logical step in exploring our solar system.
If humankind is ever to go to the stars, we must take that first step to another planet. And that planet is going to be Mars.
But how did an entire planet that may have once been covered with water become a dead, lifeless desert? Scientists look to the Martian moons Phobos and Deimos to answer this complex question.
When scientists began analyzing the data of Phobos, they realized that it was not acting like many moons do. It was not exhibiting the same qualities, not the same orbit, the same speed. And after analyzing the data, they felt that it was possible that Phobos just simply was an outer shell with a hollow middle.
The Phobos anomaly even caught the attention of one of the world's most well-known extraterrestrial scientists at the time, Carl Sagan.
Many scientists, including the great Carl Sagan, came to the conclusion that Phobos was either hollow or extremely porous.
But researchers in the UFO community go much further.
They say that Phobos and Deimos are artificial, that these are extraterrestrial space stations disguised as moons, or perhaps abandoned so long ago that they now have the appearance of something more natural. But some people say that if there's alien life to be found in the solar system, Mars, and particularly Phobos and Deimos, is the place. And indeed, if they are there, what better place? In a sense, it's hiding in plain sight, right on our doorstep.
But is Phobos natural or artificial?
Was this created by nature if it's truly hollow and just simply a shell? Or was this something created by someone else entirely? Now, we know the human race didn't do it. We know the people of Earth didn't do it. So the big question is, if it is artificial, who made it?
To answer this and many other perplexing questions about Mars, we turn to the former Soviet Union. In 1988, with the help of the international space community, the Soviets launched 2 unmanned probes to Mars. Unsealed case file, the Phobos program. July 7th and July 12th, 1988, the Soviet Union. Russia launches probes Phobos 1 and Phobos 2 to Mars. While Phobos 1 suffers a catastrophic failure en route, Phobos 2 reaches Mars orbit, and on March 25th, 1989, swings over to photograph the Martian moon, Phobos.
Now, Phobos is a very strange object, very unlike our own moon, but they know it's a celestial object that has an orbit around Mars. They consider it its moon. And the Soviet Union launched this probe to take pictures of it and learn a little bit more about it.
But when the probe enters the orbit of Phobos, it suddenly ceases to function.
It was about 40 meters away from the moon when a mysterious object appeared in one of the photographs.
TASS, the official Soviet news agency, reports Phobos 2 failed to communicate with Earth as scheduled after completing an operation yesterday around the Martian moon Phobos. Scientists at Mission Control have been unable to establish stable radio contact. What happened to the Russian probe? Just before it's about to release a lander on the moon's surface, an immense shadow of what many consider to be a UFO appears. During a conference several years later, famous Russian Air Force pilot Marina Popovich stuns the crowd when she shows the last photo taken by Phobos 2, claiming that it's the first ever photo of a UFO mothership.
This would be described as some type of cylinder or cigar-shaped UFO.
This actual photo shows what many believe to be a 12-mile-long UFO captured by Phobos 2 just before it died.
Now, when you look at this, whether it's a UFO or whether it's a glitch on the camera, no one really knows. But oddly, the probe ended up dying shortly thereafter. It mysteriously shut down and was lost.
Did something get fired at this spacecraft? Many people in the UFO and conspiracy theory community believe that Mars is inhabited and that the moons of Mars, Phobos and Deimos, are perhaps inhabited as well, or maybe are artificial satellites, alien in construction. They don't want humans getting too close. Certainly, whatever the truth, there is an extraordinary failure rate of missions to Mars and indeed to Phobos and Deimos.
Mars has remained for many years a scientific conundrum. But its hostile surface, the reason for its demise, and its similarities to Earth make it an important planet to understand. It's the closest planet in our solar system that may have at one time harbored life.
Mars is our closest neighbor, so naturally we want to think that our neighbors, if they exist, will be where we can touch them. And so Mars has lived in our pop culture as being that one place where alien life could be coming from.
Unsealed case file, The Face on Mars. July 25th, 1976, Cydonia, Mars. NASA's Viking 1 and Viking 2 orbiters take 18 images of the Cydonia region of the Martian surface. Viking 1 takes this enigmatic image of a 1.2-mile-long mesa that looks unmistakably to be a humanoid face.
Some believe that there was an ancient civilization on Mars, and indeed some features on the Martian surface are regarded by many as proof of this. The so-called face on Mars is the best known one.
35 orbits later, Viking 1 takes another photo with a different sun angle, and the same face is clearly visible. When the photos are released to the public, they spark a firestorm of speculation.
There's a debate to be had here, and many believe that there are fingerprints of some ancient extraterrestrial society on the Martian surface.
Is this an ancient artifact from a long-extinct alien society? NASA has always denied the face on Mars is a monument built by a lost Martian civilization. But 20 years after the Viking 1 pictures stunned the world, NASA sent a series of orbiters to rephotograph Cydonia at a much higher resolution. Scientists claim the higher resolution photos of the Cydonia Mesa prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that it is a natural geological feature and not an artificial structure.
There are also structures said to resemble pyramids, and every now and then from the various Mars rovers there have been what to some look like artifacts.
Researchers and investigators, they spend hours among hours going through every pixel of every photograph taken from the surface of Mars. And in that process, there have been pyramids discovered, faces discovered, squirrels, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, running lizards, turtles, Nazi memorabilia. I mean, you name it, somebody has found it on the surface of Mars in one of these photographs.
But experts consider an optical illusion is causing many to see things where there may be nothing.
The likely explanation for all of this is if you look hard enough for something, you will find it.
Skeptics say this is just pareidolia, the desire, the tendency of the human mind to see patterns and artificiality where there isn't.
Pareidolia can happen from visual or auditory stimuli.
When you look outside at a wisp of clouds, you might see a unicorn or an elephant or a mountain range. That doesn't mean that it's an elephant or a mountain range. It just means that's what it looks like.
One of the more elusive phenomena found during the scientific study of Mars is a series of mysterious lights.
One of the images from the Mars Curiosity rover that led to huge interest from the public was what looked like a light shining on the Martian surface.
It looks like a light plume that is coming out of the ground, shining up into the air. Now, where is that light coming from? What is the source of it, and why is it there?
Now, some people in the UFO community said this is evidence of intelligent life. Maybe somebody is watching Curiosity. We're on Mars, and somebody's watching us.
NASA has tried to explain the mysterious lights.
They've said anything from the sun glistening off the surface of a rock in the distance. They've talked about solar radiation or a type of flare of some kind hitting the camera and reflecting in some way.
But believers, of course, are not swayed by that sort of talk and say, no, this is proof positive that there's something still on Mars. You know, maybe there was a civilization there once. Maybe it was destroyed, but perhaps it just went underground.
They've always tried to kind of label it as something very easily explainable. And yet, at the end of the day, we don't have that explanation yet. We just simply have a picture that is unidentified and unexplained.
In recent years, scientific analysis of Mars has caused many in the UFO community to question whether life could, or perhaps already does, exist on the red planet.
As we explore more of Mars, we realize just how much we don't know about the red planet. When we look, of course, we don't think that there was water of any kind, and as we explore more, we realize we were wrong pretty much on everything that we thought about that planet. We can now almost conclusively say that it probably did have water at one time, that it may have even spawned life of some kind, but we just don't know. We haven't found it yet, but we are seeing that possibility grow and grow with each discovery that we make.
Unsealed case file, The Martian Plume. December 16, 2014, Mars. Data gathered by the Martian rover Curiosity detects methane readings that are 10 times that of the natural background of methane on Mars.
One of the great recent mysteries about Mars revolves around plumes of methane gas shooting up from the surface hundreds of miles.
Stretching nearly 150 miles into the Martian atmosphere, the plumes are immediately a source of controversy.
Now, as always with this sort of thing, there's a debate going on in the scientific community. Is this geological or is it biological? Some believe that there are prosaic geological processes that might give rise to this phenomenon, but others say no. It's the chemical signature of life.
On Earth, biological processes create methane gas, which has led many to draw the conclusion that methane is being produced by alien life on Mars.
When you talk about alien life, it's just that, it's alien. We want to find something that would be absolutely similar to carbon-based life forms here on the planet Earth. But chances are you probably won't find that. They may be based on another element entirely.
But others in the UFO community take it even further.
If there is the remnants, perhaps, of some Martian civilization, if they were driven underground by some great cataclysm, might they still be down there? And might something like this be the periodic and deliberate venting of methane gas?
Recently, another geological feature, a massive hole measuring close to 350 feet across, was captured on film by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter.
Now, it could be an illusion. It could be either a very big hill with a hole in the center or a very big hole with an even deeper hole in the center. And when you look at this, you realize, well, this is definitely a hole of some kind.
Now, the clarity of this image is extraordinary, and the preciseness of the edges is really breathtaking.
Some scientists, and many in the UFO community, believe that this giant hole is a prime place to look for microbial life.
The protection down there from the harshness of the surface would make this perhaps an ideal place for life to either develop, or if it arose billions of years ago, to have survived. But to believers, of course, this sort of thing looks like evidence of a civilization. Well, maybe this is something that's been constructed.
This one photograph, openly released by NASA, sparked an internet controversy worldwide, saying that this was proof to underground structures and chambers and roadways and so on of some underground civilization on Mars.
NASA provides no official explanation for the image, but it leads many experts to consider a startling conclusion.
I think what we're learning on Mars is that there's absolutely a possibility that life began. Now, how far did it go is the question.
Many believe that Mars is the best chance we have to find extraterrestrial life. But some experts believe that proof may be hard to come by.
One of the main things that may have stopped in its tracks any Martian civilization is simply the fact that Mars does not have the mass to hold on to its atmosphere.
If Mars did have an atmosphere thousands of years ago, what could have happened that destroyed its protective layer?
Physicist John Brandenburg has suggested that at some stage in the past, there was at least one, maybe more, nuclear explosions on Mars.
If this is true, the explosions may have naturally occurred from a combination of geologic radioactivity combined with a meteor impact. But others take it a step further.
I suppose buying into the idea of war in heaven suggests that these nuclear explosions were not natural, but were really evidence of a nuclear war involving an extraterrestrial race.
When you think about life on Mars and potentially an intelligent civilization that may have budded millions of years ago, well before humans started here on Earth, the question is, why aren't they there now?
Civilization there was brought to an end. One possibility is that parts of that civilization might have fled somewhere. Where's the logical place for them to go? Earth.
For thousands of years, we have wondered if we are alone in the universe. Today, we may have the technology to answer the question. But the scientific search for extraterrestrial intelligence began in the late 1950s with the birth of SETI.
SETI stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And these are radio astronomers who believe that if there are civilizations out there, the best way to detect them will be listening for radio signals that they've either sent inadvertently just through things like television and radio, like we have, or as a deliberate attempt to try to make contact.
Communicating with aliens is their prime goal, and they regularly listen for and send messages in the hopes of making contact.
Their effort to try and detect radio waves is done through radio astronomy. There are very powerful radio telescopes here on Earth that essentially are tasked to scan the skies, look for some type of signal of some kind that differs from what you naturally see in the universe.
But what is a radio wave? Why are they important? And where are they coming from?
Everything that you see by looking up gives some type of radio wave or radio signature to it, and it's different across the board. A planet or an exoplanet is going to give off a different radio wave and radio signature than a quasar or a nebula or a galaxy.
We are spinning through an infinite universe, so capturing the radio waves of an alien species is not as easy as it sounds.
Unfortunately, it's like looking for a needle in a stack of needles. You have so many radio waves out there that are naturally occurring. You have to figure out which one sticks out that shows that it's intelligent.
Celestial bodies with magnetic fields produce radio waves, and this electromagnetic radiation has different frequencies. Scientists can tell by looking at these different frequencies what these different objects are.
Unsealed case file. The Arecibo message. November 16th, 1974. Puerto Rico.
In 1974, scientists developed a message, or a radio signal, that we were going to broadcast from the Arecibo radio telescope out into the cosmos in hopes that somebody was listening.
This was the idea of the astronomer Frank Drake. And what he did is he used prime numbers to send a binary message. So you could actually, if you ever picked up this signal, you could decide to decode it one of two ways, white-black or black-white.
The message depicts vital information about Earth.
This was a diagrammatical representation of the Arecibo telescope itself, human beings, and again some basic information about planet Earth and life on Earth.
The message is sent to a distant star cluster known as M13. But critics claim there is a problem with this methodology.
We were going to beam this message to a star system that was 21,000 light years away. Just assume for a moment that somebody was listening. But we weren't going to know until 21,000 years later. Now that is a pretty long time to wait, but now add in the fact that they want to respond. It would take them 21,000 years to then beam that message, assuming that that will travel at the speed of light, back to us. It will take a full 42,000 years to then just say hello.
But there is another more disturbing reason that has some experts concerned.
Many people at the time said that the Arecibo message was highly irresponsible. Indeed, the Astronomer Royal in the UK described it as a scientific suicide note. And he said that we ought not to be drawing attention to ourselves in this way and making ourselves known to civilizations that might be orders of magnitude more powerful than us and perhaps hostile.
Scientists searching for extraterrestrial intelligence in the universe are sending and listening to radio messages from deep space. But in the 1970s, leading astrobiologists of the day decide to try a different approach. Unsealed case file. Pioneer 10. March 2nd, 1972. Cape Kennedy, Florida. NASA launches the Pioneer 10 space probe. It's an historic event. Pioneer will become the first probe to travel the outer planets. The first to travel through the asteroid belt. And the first man-made object to enter interstellar space. But there is something else on board that is also a first.
Scientists thought that it would be an interesting idea to place messages to civilizations that might one day encounter these spacecraft.
Leading extraterrestrial scientists Frank Drake and Carl Sagan are given 3 weeks to come up with a plaque that is eventually attached to Pioneer 10.
And so they created a plaque that was visual in nature, where it showed a human male and a human female.
But also images that would say something about our civilization, technical information that would illustrate the position of our sun in the galaxy, and additionally information about DNA and indeed early human development. So this was, to all intents and purposes, a message from humanity to the stars.
Just 5 years later, NASA sends another probe, but this time with a recorded message. Unsealed case file. Voyager 1. September 5th, 1977, Cape Canaveral, Florida.
The Voyager program kind of took the next step in trying to communicate with aliens. Instead of a visual plaque like on the side of Pioneer, the Voyager had a golden record.
These were in the form of records that one day perhaps alien civilizations might find and be able to play. And there were a series of images and sounds that really tried to summarize life on Earth.
Voyager's golden record tries to encapsulate life on Earth and all of its biodiversity.
And the intent with the Voyager record was essentially to give them a piece of us, that they could hear who and what we were. They could essentially see who and what we were. They could understand the life that could be found here on planet Earth. They could find planet Earth.
These were scenes from everyday life, music, but also just really, I suppose, a testament to planet Earth and the human race, who we are.
But many in the space industry are uneasy that NASA is speaking for all of humanity.
Some people say we shouldn't do it at all, that the universe might be a dangerous place and we ought not to advertise our presence to more advanced civilizations.
Others consider arguments against broadcasting a message to be pointless, because planet Earth is an already easily detectable civilization.
If we send a message, what do we say? And indeed, who should say it? Who truly speaks for planet Earth? Should we send a simple greeting? Should we send an invitation to make contact?
We're giving them a map to exactly where we are, when essentially they could be malicious. They could be our enemy. And do we want to give a blueprint to our inner workings to our enemies here on Earth? Absolutely not. Well, with the plaque, with the Voyager record, with the messages beamed into space, that's essentially what we are doing.
NASA is not the only organization attempting to communicate with extraterrestrial civilizations. Other scientists have been sending physical and radio wave messages toward distant stars for decades.
Scientists believe that radio waves are the best way to receive and perhaps even send messages between civilizations. Firstly, because they occur naturally. So it's a kind of logical thing to observe in the universe and then think, hey, we could use this. The critical point is that you can encode information in that way.
But as scientists send messages to space, they also look for a response. Unsealed case file, the WOW signal. August 15th, 1977, Ohio State University. Big Ear Telescope.
Possibly the best evidence ever of an alien civilization came in 1977 when radio astronomers at the Big Ear Telescope detected a signal which seemed to have all the characteristics that scientists said an artificial signal should have.
It wasn't during the time that scientists were actually looking at the screens. This was at a time that was considered downtime. It was in the middle of the night, and scientists noticed it the next morning.
At 11:16 p.m., Big Ear records a signal 30 times louder than naturally occurring signals. After 72 seconds, it abruptly stops.
The astronomer who was on duty when this was first detected was so stunned by this that he wrote in pen on the computer printout, "Wow!" exclamation mark in the margin, because to him this was exactly what SETI had been looking for.
Now they tried to find it again. It did not repeat, which is what you want to see on an intelligent message. Now essentially they could have just beamed that message once and that was it, and didn't repeat it. We don't know for sure, but this was something that piqued that scientist's interest, and it's kind of lived in SETI legend ever since.
Does that mean that this was a signal not from an alien planet, but from an alien spacecraft? And might that explain why it didn't repeat?
Over the years, SETI has detected other promising signals. But so far, all attempts at decoding the alleged messages have turned up nothing.
There was a similar incident in 2010, and this was dubbed the new WOW signal.
Now, this signal looked like nothing that they had detected before. It was not easily discernible as a galaxy or nebula or pulsar or something that they could discount it as. So they tried to find it again. They searched the same area of sky in hopes that that signal was repeating. Unfortunately, it was not.
The new WOW signal is unique because it was discovered in a frequency range known for being quiet.
There is a very quiet part of the spectrum, generally known as the water hole, and natural objects don't tend to radiate in those frequencies. So SETI scientists have said that if you wanted to listen out for a message, this would be a very obvious part of the spectrum to study. Finally, it appeared to emanate from very close to a nearby star, which some people say is perhaps home to a planet where there might be something in the so-called habitable zone.
But critics say the new WOW signal could have been emitted from one of our own satellites.
We don't know if this was something that was detected on accident, that it may have been one of our signals that maybe had hit a satellite or bounced back to us.
It's one thing to detect a signal, and quite another to decipher it.
To really figure out how we're going to talk to an extraterrestrial civilization, scientists are looking here on Earth and how life communicates.
Some scientists are looking at the possibility of understanding language, if you can call it that, from whales and dolphins as a first step on the road to maybe deciphering an extraterrestrial language.
But many experts believe that if we are going to understand an alien message, we will ultimately need some extraterrestrial help.
If they wanted us to detect their signal and decode it, which surely they would, an alien civilization would, I think, want to make it easy for us. This isn't going to be a puzzle, so they're going to want to send us that Rosetta Stone. They're going to want to send us that primer.
In 2003, the Hubble Space Telescope performed an astounding study.
The Hubble trained its camera on a small pinpoint-sized spot in the sky that was essentially dark. Scientists believe that there was possibly nothing there.
The Hubble Space Telescope's ultra-deep field study found an estimated 10,000 galaxies.
When you look at the photographs and you understand just what you are looking at and how massive just that pinpoint is, you realize how astronomical, pardon the pun, our universe truly is. That proves beyond any shadow of a doubt, finding intelligent life in this universe is going to be nothing but luck.
SETI scientists consider the apparent silence from the cosmos not a sign of failure.
It's exactly what they would expect, but the technology, they say, is now approaching the point where if there are civilizations out there, they would expect to pick them up within the next few years.
But many scientists also contend that finding intelligent life in the universe probably means they will be more advanced than us. And that may be one of our biggest problems.
There's an irony about a civilization that as it progresses, it might become not louder, but more quiet. We see this with the transition from analog to digital technology. Actually, digital produces far less of a radio signature that would be detectable across interstellar distances.
Advanced alien civilizations may be hard to detect with conventional radio waves, unless, like us, they are trying to communicate on purpose.
The logical beacon is a sequence of prime numbers. The chances of this occurring naturally are, of course, infinitesimally small. So if you pick up a radio signal that's a sequence of prime numbers, that screams to you, there's a civilization out there, and they're trying to get our attention.
Maybe one day, in the not-too-distant future, one of our signals will be heard by an alien civilization.
Critics of SETI say, come on, this is an organization packed with really super intelligent scientists. They've been looking for decades and they've found nothing. The search really has only just begun.
Evidence suggests that if aliens exist, they are more technologically advanced than humans. But is technology an evolutionary trait? Many scientists believe the survival of our species depends on our ability to innovate. And there is one technological advance that promises to change our place in the universe forever.
Artificial intelligence is a technology that allows a computer to think. We know that machines are programmed. They can do program to do whatever task we want them to do, but that's all they know. In the field of AI, now you're teaching them how to think for themselves, how to make decisions, how to understand what they're doing, and then learn from it.
It's the great science fiction dream, or perhaps nightmare. Could a machine one day become self-aware? What would machine intelligence be like?
Unsealed case file. The Voronezh incident. September 23rd, 1989. Voronezh, Soviet Union.
The story of the Voronezh encounter was a few children were out playing and saw a spaceship-type craft out in the distance.
300 miles southeast of Moscow, a group of children playing in a park witness a boomerang-shaped UFO in the sky.
As these children then began to watch and see what was going to happen, a 9-foot-tall, what they described as an alien, exited the craft.
Gripped with fear, one of the boys starts screaming.
In the Voronezh incident, the robot that was seen might have come straight out of the pages of a sci-fi novel. It is almost the archetypal robot. This is exactly how science fiction writers envisaged a robot, and perhaps indeed how scientists might design one.
To silence the boy, the alien fires a laser-like weapon.
This weapon was used against the children, where it actually fired on one of them, and the child disappeared for a couple of minutes.
It's a tense moment for all involved. The machine seems to show no emotion.
One reason why AI might be such a threat is that machine intelligence would be unclouded by love and compassion. This would simply be cold logic. And if human beings were assessed as inferior, emotion would play no part. We might be deemed a threat and deemed something to be wiped out.
The missing child reappears apparently unharmed. Then, the UFO and its occupants quickly fly into the sky.
Robots are often reported during UFO encounters involving entities, and there is certainly great logic in the idea that extraterrestrial explorers would have robot helpers. If you can do interstellar travel, you can probably design robots, and that will enable you to do a lot of the difficult and dangerous tasks.
But if any or all of the Voronezh aliens were some form of robot, what were they sent to do?
Now, is that robot helper a guardian designed to protect the biological life form? Is it simply a tool to recover samples? We don't know. But certainly, if humans go into space, they will doubtless, if the technology is there, take robots with them to do the legwork and to do the dangerous and difficult tasks that we can't do.
When you look at what the human race is doing with its technology, it really isn't that far-fetched that an extraterrestrial civilization, given the fact that their intelligence grows to create AI and beyond, that they are essentially going to merge with machines as well.
But the promise of artificial intelligence has many scientists concerned.
Artificial intelligence harnessing that computational power is going to be a very lethal combination, so it has to be controlled in some way. So I think that that fact, coupled with aliens are out there and they're intelligent, they're probably going to go down the same path. I think artificial intelligence is absolutely going to collide in the future.
Witnesses of some close encounters have reported seeing robots alongside UFOs. But if aliens are doing reconnaissance of Earth, it makes sense that robots could accomplish the first wave of research and more.
When you look at human space exploration, we are sending probes everywhere. They're unmanned, they're small, and they essentially just watch. Now, the theory of an alien civilization exploring the cosmos, my guess is they're going to do the same thing.
Unsealed case file, the Kara UFO. August 25th, 1972, Kochi Prefecture, Japan.
The Kara incident from 1972 in Japan ranks, I think, as one of the most truly extraordinary UFO encounters of all time. It involved what really looks like some sort of mini probe device, a small, apparently metallic craft that was seen by a boy hovering over a rice paddy.
A witness saw a UFO out in the rice fields, and he described it as more of a mini ship, that this was something that literally you can essentially hold on your lap.
The boy watches the mini UFO flying in and out of the rice fields.
And he thought, okay, this is something very strange. And so he goes and he gets a friend of his to come back to the field, and sure enough, they both saw this mysterious craft. Eventually, it had left the area. They had no pictures, no nothing to take back with them. So they thought, well, let's take a camera out, and if this thing shows back up, then we can essentially capture a photo of it.
They try again the next day, and to their amazement, it shows up.
They snapped a very fuzzy and grainy photograph of whatever this object was, but where this story takes a very weird turn, after the flash went off from the camera, it was like something happened to the UFO.
The UFO is disabled long enough for the boys to approach the craft.
The boys recovered this small object and took it home. I mean, this was truly extraordinary. This small device, whatever it was small enough for them to pick it up and carry it.
He then wraps it up and puts it in a satchel and takes it home.
Intrigued by the device, the boys try to understand how it works.
They tried to get a closer look at the insides of this thing, and there seemed to be electronics in there.
They gave some description of it to the media thereafter, but of course the object mysteriously disappeared in the next couple of days.
But what could the Kara UFO be?
If this story is taken at face value, this thing may well have been some sort of alien probe sent to explore planet Earth, and perhaps sent to take and recover samples from the surface of our planet.
Experts suggest one way to explore the galaxy would be to employ a self-replicating probe. If the Kara UFO was extraterrestrial, one theory is that it may have built itself.
The idea of a self-replicating machine is that a single probe, probably an AI probe, makes a copy of itself, an exact copy from resources that it finds as it travels around in the cosmos.
Because that one machine can only cover so much ground. It's a physical object, it can only travel so fast, and the universe is pretty vast.
Could some UFO sightings actually be AI probes scouring the planet for information?
One of the most common types of UFOs seen for decades has been the small spherical point of light. Are we dealing here with AI probes? Are we dealing with the idea of self-replicating machines designed by an extraterrestrial civilization, and something which have spread out throughout the entire galaxy?
Ufologists believe some unidentified flying objects could be unmanned probes sent from another world. But with so many astronomical objects entering and leaving our solar system all the time, how can we recognize one that might be a UFO? Unsealed case file, Asteroid 1991 VG, November 6th, 1991. The Sun. An American astronomer discovers a unique object orbiting the Sun, following a similar path as the Earth.
Now, the characteristics of this were bizarre. It seemed to be highly reflective, and at first he thought this was perhaps a discarded space rocket. Certainly it seemed to be artificial, but no space rocket or satellite fit the bill here. So again, if this thing wasn't an asteroid and it wasn't a space rocket constructed by humans, what was it?
Its extremely shiny surface